Before I get started, the Free Press on Sunday had a nice article that was just perfect for me. 8 tips for a fearless presentation. I get my glasses out to read it. There wasn't anything there that I was prepared to do, but
First thing is don't drop your glasses.
I just thought it was very timely for this coming up on Sunday. You're supposed to first prepare, which I didn't do too well. You're supposed to create a script. I didn't do that very well. I brought visuals. That's about the only thing I did that was on here. I'm supposed to cut the conversation in half, because probably I have more to say than you want to hear. I'm supposed to practice in front of the mirror. I didn't do that. I'm supposed to wear something confident, like my least stained pair of khakis. I'm supposed to tell you what I'm good at. I'm not quite sure what anything there I could qualify for. And I'm supposed to pay attention to you people, to what you're interested in. So with that, I guess I will just start at the beginning of Dillman and Upton. Dillman and Upton, we use 1910 as the starting date, mainly because every time I pinned Art Dillman down as to when it really started, we got a lot of stories, but we never did get an answer. So this old picture shows a car here, and someone said that's probably a 1910 Buick. So with that, we decided maybe that was a good date. But we've got some advertising that went back into 1907, and C.W. Upton started the operation. He was an uncle of my father, and he was one of the sons of the Sterling Heights, I guess it's now their Department of Natural Resources. This Upton house over Sterling Heights was where my ancestors started. And my father was born over in that area. He was not, the fellow that built that house was a brother of my grandfather. So my father was over, we don't know just where, but he started from there. And then my father moved with his family up in the middle of the state, a little town called Maple Rapids, which is northwest of St. John's. He moved up there as farmers, and his father started a lumber yard up there. And the uncle came to Rochester, and according to various things along the way, he was kind of a character. He was an entrepreneur, he was an auctioneer, and in looking at this picture, he was probably pretty flashy. All these wagons had canopies that were way ahead of the time. The car was way ahead of its time. But this picture is taken over on University, where our first location was, where Jerry's gun shop is. That house where Jerry's gun shop was where C.W. Upton lived, and the coal yard at that time in wood. I'm not sure when they called it wood, whether he was in lumber business or stove wood, but that operation was in the lot next door and then onto the corner. The story was that C.W. wasn't much of a morning man, so in the morning he'd get out of bed and raise the window, yell out some orders, and then go back to bed. So anyway, as things moved along, C.W. got the business started, and in 1914, when Henry Ford announced that he was going to pay $5 a day to the help, my father came down from the farm to work for his uncle at C.W. Upton. I guess it was lumber, or it was called wood and coal at that time. And Art Dillman was C.W.'s son-in-law. Art married C.W.'s daughter along the way. He was a bookkeeper for Detroit Edison, and he kept books for C.W. on the side. So after my father came down and worked there up until when World War I started, he was drafted. He went off to the war, and he left from Fort Custer in Battle Creek. So I was going to bring it. I had his discharge papers. He started in Fort Custer and ended up in Fort Custer. So when he came back from the service, I guess probably around 1919 or 1920, he and Art Dillman got together and figured out some way to buy out CW, and at that time it became Dillman and Upton. And during those years in the 20s, up until the big depression hit, things were pretty good. The coal business was good. At one time, they used to sell 125 train carloads of coal a year there, which was, the whole area burned coal. There was competition here, but they seemed to have done very well with the coal business. And then the big depression hit, and there wasn't much demand for lumber anymore, other than to fix a porch broken step or something. And so then the coal business pretty well supported them through the Great Depression. And they seemed to always employ a number of people trying to work off coal bills during the recession, because there was no work and people had to have heat, so that was somehow the managed to make it work. So they survived the Great Depression. Then we got it on through the end of the 30s, into the 20s were pretty decent years. There was a lot of building going on in the area, and they always seemed to have gotten their share of the building. Back in those days, we had 5 lumber yards in this town through the, I say, the 40s into the early 50s. We were on Main Street. Knowles was where the elevator is, next door to the elevator. We had T&M was down on John R. in Auburn. We had Baker Lumber over on South Boulevard, and there was another one I can't. But anyway, there was a lot of competition out here. That after all these years, we're the only one left. But so then World War II came along. Again, we were back into a problem with material. You could not get lumber. We were still in the coal business. Coal business was pretty good. And my older brother Jack and Art Dillman's son Chuck both were in the service. Jack was in the Army, Chuck was in the Navy. So they were gone all during the early part of the 40s. And then late, about 45, my father got cancer, and he died in 46. I was 10 years old at the time. And my brother came back from the service, and Chuck came back from the service and came into the business, and they perked the business up again. It had another rebirth. But one of the strange things was that my dad and Art Dillman were partners, and generally when a partner in a partnership dies, that's the end of the partnership. But I was only 10 years old, and I guess Art Dillman thought enough of my dad that he continued that partnership on until I was of age. So he continued to pay my mother. I guess, I'm not sure whether weekly, monthly, or whatever he did. But anyway, he carried that partnership on until such a time as then it became Dillman and Upton Incorporated, when the partnership finally was dissolved. From there, we went on to Chuck and Jack, and then Ed Forbush, who was a loyal employee for many, many years, became one of the stockholders in the business. So we had Dillmans, we had Uptons, we had Forbushes. This thing got kind of spread out over the period of time, and then with various deaths along the way, it got more complicated because we now inherit a bunch of heirs that had no interest in the lumber business, but had interest in money. So we struggled with that program for a period of time. First Art Dillman died, and we got through that, and then Ed Forbush died, and we got through his ancestors. And eventually, when my siblings, I had 2 sisters, 1 brother, in fact the brother was the major stockholder at that time, but they all had stock in it, and trying to collect this back into corral it became a big problem. But eventually I convinced my brother-in-law that he'd lost interest in the lumber industry and maybe he could retire. And so the next day he put his house up for sale and moved to Florida. That's how disinterested he was. And so we arranged a program to buy him out. We, over a period of years, bought him out. And then as time went on, and my kids went off to college, and one of them went to Michigan Tech, and then transferred to Michigan State into building construction that I took. But he went on to work as a national builder, and the other two, one went to Michigan State, one went to Ferris. They came into the business, and so it worked out very well that there were only two of them, not three of them, because 3 against 1 or 2 against 1 would never have worked. So that was a blessing. We survived that one. And so business was quite good when we were down on Main Street. Eric Kettleson was one of our great customers of that era. His father, Tag, was a great customer, and we survived well down there, but it wasn't long before we had outgrown the situation, and we had to do something. And so Sid Weinberger owed me some money, and I went up on Woodward to have a chat with Sid about money. And Sid said he had about 3 different companies, and he says, there's no money in any of the companies, and you can sue me, you can do whatever you want. However, he said, I've got this building that's been for sale for a long time, and you might be interested in it. I now said, I'm not interested in this thing. Well, he took me on a tour of it, and we had already had some plans to add on another addition downtown, and so I looked at that, and I thought, this does have some potential for what we need. It had this big building on the back that I wasn't aware was there, a big pole barn. I was familiar with the front of the building because that had been built in the early 50s as a aerosol plant. They had a vision here that we were going to create some industry. Twist Grill was our only industry, and a bunch of people got together and thought they could establish this aerosol plant to fill aerosol cans with chemicals. So I think they got a loan from the government and tore down half the foundry where there had been a fire and added this building on the end of it. And so I knew about that building. It was a big, open, freestanding building before Weinberger had gotten in there and chopped it all up into little cubby holes. And so I got my banker and I took him up there, and it was kind of comical. He was a young, new commercial loan man. And he walked in there, and he was just, are you sure you know what you're doing? This is a mystery here. I mean, the average person wouldn't have had any idea, because the building that's now where the hardware is was cut up into all kinds of little cubby holes. In fact, over the kitchen department, there's a balcony there. That's left from Weinberger, and where my boys' offices are, that's all left from Weinberger. But we tore out everything in between. And as a little sidebar, we paid Weinberger to tear out all this stuff that he'd put in there with used lumber. And he had one of his guys in the back for 2-3 weeks ripping 2x10s into 2x4s that he used to build the last house he built in town out here at Old Perch. The whole house was built with 2x4s that he resawed out of stuff that came out of there. So anyway, we bought the building, and shortly thereafter, Dr. Otala agreed to buy the property downtown and gave us time to remodel up there and move up there. Just as we were about to open, about a month or so, we had the grand opening all planned. I had done everything that the city had requested. They originally said I didn't need a building permit because we were just doing inside stuff. So I didn't get a permit. Well, towards the end, the building inspector came out and said, maybe you better get a building permit. So I got a building permit. We were going along nicely, just finished up, had all the advertising out for a grand opening, and Ken Johnson, the city manager, came up and said, you've got to sprinkle this building. I said, sprinkle the building? We were now talking $100,000 to sprinkle the building. Well, you've got to do that. So we argued and fought and carried on for a long time. My insurance company did not want the building sprinkled because they had just had a disaster down here when Bolliard Lumber moved out here. They were all ready to open after the new year, and through the holidays there was no one there, and they had the pipe froze and the sprinkler went off, and it just drenched the whole store with. So sprinkler systems were not real popular with our insurance people. Anyway, we finally ended up that there was a water line that ran behind the DPW, that a big line came from the wells out of town, and they thought they would have to supply Dr. Otala with some big-time water for his project, so they had in mind that they could bring this water line down to the railroad right away and run it down there. So we paid $50,000 to bring that water line down to Woodward, and then just capped it off. It never did, sat there for years. They finally tied it in, I guess, but we got through that crisis and we were open on time. And so after we were finished up downtown and moved totally, I pretty well backed away from the business. The boys had pretty well taken over up on Woodward, and I just let them continue on, and I was just delighted to be able to step back and let them run the business, and they have done, in the process, have bought me out. It's their business now, and I'm very happy that they've been very successful. They went through a horrible 3-4 years during this last recession, but the last couple of years has been very good. Business is booming again, and hopefully it'll continue. So I don't know, I probably left out a lot. Oh, I guess one sidebar here I wanted to, about C.W. Upton. He was a character, and this was in Pontiac Press Gazette, July 28, 1914. Rochester, July 28th, as a result of a discussion in the office of Rochester Era said to have arisen over the publication of a report in regard to school board election. Editor W.A. Fox is at home suffering from injuries, and Charles W. Upton, a coal dealer, is under arrest charged with assault and battery. Editor Fox alleges Upton attacked him in the Era office Saturday and that he sustained injuries which have prevented him from returning to work. Well, according to the story, they got waving their fingers around, and Fox pointed his finger at C.W., and C.W. bit the end of his finger off. I don't know how it ever ended up, but this was a news release that surfaced somewhere along the way. And then, I guess the other little side note is Art Dillman's son, Chuck, was pretty much a spoiled kid. You know, he had the fancy new car in high school, and he was the man about town. Well, he had 5 wives before he was through, but his third wife was a widow of a GM executive, and they had a lot of money, and they built a new house out off of Rochester Road there at Mead Road. And I think he got into the sauce some night and took a swing at her, and she took exception to that. He went in to take a shower. She took a gun and shot him through the shower. Didn't kill him, but she so that was another little scandal that Dillman and Upton lived through. I mean, the stories with Chuck went on and on. He went to Las Vegas one time and lost a lot of money, and he called my brother and wanted to sell him his stock right from Las Vegas. And my brother somehow figured out a way to get the money to buy the stock. But well, the stories go on and on. But so that pretty well wraps us through the history. There's a lot of blanks in there, but I would hope maybe you've got some questions, and if not, you eat your lunch. Yes, Kay?
When did you move on to Woodward?
What's that?
When did you move on to Woodward? When from
1989. We've been there like 25 years, I think. 89, I think. 99, 209, yeah. Yes?
87, according to your publication.
Does it say there? Is that about right? We've been there for 25 years, I know.
Can you tell us about the photos and other things that you have on the table?
Probably one of the more interesting one here is this. Is actually an architect's rendering of the Davison house that owned the Pistons, owned the... That is a rendering. That house is 30,000 square feet, and it's on a semicircle, and all the walls are on a 13-degree angle. Don't ask me why. That was
whose house is that?
Roy Rewald. They built that house. It's quite a...
Where?
It's over on it's on Lasher, off of Woodward in Bloomfield. And I guess she still lives there. It's, as far as I know, she's still. And then another monster that we furnished material on was the Flagstar house out on Brewster. That was another 30,000 square foot house, but that one had probably a 6,000 or 8,000 square foot museum for his wildlife. He had everything, including an elephant, I think, in there. I mean, it was. So we have been very privileged over the years to furnish material on some wonderful projects. Eric's operation, they did a lot of great projects.
My house.
This was an aerial shot from downtown that shows when the Standard gas station was still on the corner there before the donut shop. This is University and Main Street, and then the lumberyard was right down in that area. We also had the coal yard across the street where we had, and now see that's where the library and all that is in there now.
He's got on the back of this was about 1950.
This shot, probably all of you have seen this truck in various parades over the years. It's been in every parade for 15 years. Well, this truck was put together by Jim Lawler's company, Tank Truck Service, and I ran into him in a grocery store one day, and I had a picture, or I guess I had the picture with him. I said, "You got anybody down there who would take a little side government job to put this rusty old truck back together?" It's a 1953 Chevrolet that my kids gave me for Christmas one year. I tried to buy it, I couldn't buy it, but it was over in Romeo, and Todd was a friend of the daughter, and so we got to Dad through the daughter. The buyers delivered this on Christmas morning. I lived over off of Avon, or off of Livernois and Riverbend, and so on Christmas morning this shows up on buyer's record with big red ribbons, and it was the rustiest looking bunch of. I had a friend said, "You better keep the spark plugs and throw the rest of it away." Anyway, I showed the picture to Jim. I might have somebody to work at that. So he had it for a year down there. Did a great job putting it back together. This was our calendar of our 100th anniversary that you might look at. It's some of these same pictures here, but unfortunately over the years, the old pictures I wish we still had. I mean, I'm delighted that we have these of the wagons. This was my dad and Art Dillman out in front of downtown. And it shows some of the old trucks in the old days. They talked about the early trucks when they get a load of lumber to go south. That was before the bridge was built, I guess, that they'd have to go up the hill backwards because the trucks did not have enough power to get up frontwards. They could back up the hill with the loads. And one other interesting, this was the hospital annual circle of caring picture that Jerry Post did. And Jerry just died last week, and I'm so delighted that I have that one. I have another one that he did personally for me for the lumberyard, and then he did one for the farmhouse that we had down on Hamlin Road, so I've got some. But this was the funeral piece that he did, and as it was explained to me, he was painting this picture, and Carolyn, his wife, took a picture of him painting, and then he painted himself back into the picture, so it almost looks like a photograph. This may have been the photograph, but he actually did a painting of it. But Jerry was just a wonderful guy, and he probably left as big an imprint on our area as anybody with all the artwork. It's all over the library and all the whole section of the hospital. So it's sad that he left us, but he certainly left a lot of history.
Just to add, our mug that we're selling today, that's his picture.
June, you're talking to a deaf guy.
Oh. the mug that we're selling, that's one of his photographs.
Oh, is that one of his?
On it. Yeah, of the pharmacy. Yeah.
Of the opera.
Of the opera house. Yeah.
Gail Kembler, Gail and I are cousins, for those of you who don't know, we're first cousins. Gail wanted me to remember that when the DUR car barns were across the street from the lumberyard downtown, old gas was there, and the car barns had been abandoned, and the smokestack was still there. Well, I must have been about 5 years old, and John Kemmler was contracted to bring this smokestack down. So my sister and I sat there beside the lumberyard all day long waiting for that smokestack to come down, and it never did come down until the next day. We weren't there, but we spent a whole day waiting and watching for that smokestack to come down. And, yes?
When you were next to the railroad and you were thinking of expanding before you got this place, the Marathon gas station, did you get a hold of that before?
Yeah, no, we bought the gas station after Joe Beaton
Yeah.
left. Yeah, no, we used that as a parking lot. And we used the gas station for a kitchen display at one time. But,
Yeah, that's right.
but we had a plan to expand, like that chunk behind the gas station there. That was another fiasco. We submitted the plan to the city, and they said that you have to have handicap accessible upstairs. This was all going to be the warehouse and storage. So you have to go to Lansing to appear before the handicap judge. The judge is in a wheelchair, smoking one cigarette after another. And I go up and plead my case. I said, we're in the lumber business. Our employees can't be very handicapped to deal with what we have, and it's not a place for customers. And I pleaded my case, and I was given a pass, but we never did use it. But that was another fiasco.
How long?
Eric would know well about some of these fiascos that you go through to loops to do anything.
How long did the railroad run
It was abandoned about,
before you left?
well, we were there, I would say it must have been about the late 60s, because the trains were still running. In fact, when Dow Chemical had a program that they built 100 coal cars to supply the Midland plant, and they brought those trains through here with 100 cars, and they were, I don't know, they were magnesium or aluminum. They were lightweight
They
cars.
went through the town?
Oh yeah, they had 100.
100
And see, that whole railroad is a grade going all the way to Oregon. It's uphill, very gradual, but it goes uphill. And the engine would get halfway up, probably past Woodward, past Ludlow there, and start to spin. So now we had the whole town blocked up with this train. And they were in no hurry. I mean, traffic was backed up in all directions. People were having a fit. Eventually, somebody would come down and break the cars, and the grade was enough, they would roll back so they could open the road again. Then they'd bring another engine out from Detroit, would take another few hours, and they'd push. So they'd push it up. Well, they abandoned that program fairly quickly. It did not go on too long, because I think they found another route to bring them in.
Then the other railroad went from the train station that was demolished,
Yeah,
and then that went to the Ford plant, didn't it?
yeah, that's Grand Trunk, went across to
Yeah,
Romeo.
Grand Trunk.
They hauled a lot of tractors and stuff. In fact, when that train, they had a derailment that took the depot out, and they had a whole train carload of GMC trucks. I got pictures somewhere, probably Rod has trucks laying on the side down there along the siding. Somewhere I've got some of that.
Someplace.
I guess one question for you I had in
Yes.
looking at this, one of my tractor publications had a big spiel on WW2 scrap drives. Do you have a picture of that pile of scrap that was in the playground?
Yep.
We had a pile of scrap there during that scrap drive, which is now the parking lot for the ad building there. I mean, a huge pile.
No, I've got,
And at the same time, they had paper drives. And I was probably maybe 8 or so. And they'd have the paper drives on Sunday. My dad would keep the lumberyard open for the scales. And we'd run around. I remember riding around in a pickup with a couple of mason contractors, the Chapman brothers, picking up papers, and then we'd go down and weigh them. And then they had a railroad car across where we unloaded coal across the street there. And they would fill those cars with newspaper.
Whatever happened to the scales?
Whatever happened? Scales finally, we didn't need them anymore for coal. We rebuilt them because we used to have to weigh all the pickups. When the new pickups came in town, they had to be weighed before they could be licensed. So when that finally faded away, we got out of the scale business. But I can't, you must have seen a picture of it. Somewhere I've seen a picture.
no, I have not seen a picture of it.
I mean, it was just a huge pile of
What was in the
scrap.
scrap? What kind of scrap did you collect?
Scrap metal for, during the war effort, you know,
And where did it come from?
every farmer, every backyard, every fountain pen, they took anything that was metal. But, I'm a antique tractor collector and miscellaneous junk, and there's a lot of problems about that all this good iron that farmers had at the fence rows disappeared into the scrap heap, but there's enough of them left out there, but
Are we gonna hear about your tractors today?
what about it?
Are we gonna hear about them?
No.
Cause I can't
Not unless you have some questions about it.
tell everybody how many tractors you own.
No, I've got a tractor collection, I think I've got like 15 big farm tractors.
So tell them what you used to do when you were on Hamlin with them.
Yeah, when I had this house down in Hamlin, I really got into it a little bigger where I had room to deal with it. I used to put them out there on the road during the holidays, and I was always having people stopping and wanted to get pictures of their kids on them. And
Decorate them with the.
Oh yeah, I do decorate them at Christmas. I had the wheels going around.
They're all out at Metamora now, aren't they?
That's what?
Yeah, out at, Todd's house. In Metamora?
Yeah, they're Todd's. Yeah, they're all Todd's. Yeah. All right, if I bored you to death, maybe you can have some lunch.